Welcome to part 24 of Basic Training, the weekly series where I teach you how to play every track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Today we're going to be covering everything you need to know about DK Jungle on 150cc. We're going to be going over the advanced strategies that I use in my current personal best, along with some easier alternative strategies that you can use if you're primarily interested in just beating the Staff Ghost. We're also going to be covering the world record strats in detail because they're quite a bit different from my PB strats. Without further ado, let's get into the guide, starting with the recommended build. For DK Jungle, you've got a couple of build choices. The world record build, which is what I use in my PB, is Wario, Sports Coupe, Azure Rollers, and Paper Glider. However, the Shroomless world record build replaces Wario with Waluigi and Sports Coupe with Wiggler, which is lower speed but better acceleration and mini turbo. As far as I can tell though, it doesn't matter too much, and the strategies that each build uses are more or less exactly the same. Now moving on to the run, once you load up the track, hold right at the very start of the run and do a right drift around the first turn. Build up a mini turbo, do a left drift, and prepare for the first of many super annoying strategies of the run. Start a right drift and hold left on the joystick to widen your drift angle. The idea is to build up a mini turbo before getting to the route here, so you may need to hold right for just a bit to help you with that. But it's really important to make sure and build up that mini turbo well before you get to the route. Then grab the coin on the left and start a right drift, making sure that you hop over the route as you do so. The technique you're looking at now is called a super bounce. The flower that we just tricked off is a bounce pad, and tricking off of it will launch you forward a bit. I'm not 100% sure why this happens, but if you release a mini turbo just before you trick off the flower, you'll bounce much faster and much farther, saving more than half a second over just tricking off the ramp like you can see here. Unfortunately, the timing for tricking off a bounce pad is fairly wonky, and it'll probably take a few attempts to figure this out, but when you do get it, it'll be super obvious since you'll land almost all the way in front of this little totem thing. One more thing to point out about this strategy is that you want to make sure to be far enough to the left so that when you hop, you can hop clean over the edge of the route. Otherwise, you'll hit the route, and 9 times out of 10, it'll fling you off to the right and you'll miss the flower entirely. You also don't want to be angled too far to the left when doing the super bounce because otherwise you'll just fall off the track. If it wasn't obvious, this strategy can be pretty annoying to get consistent at, and if all of this is giving you a bunch of problems, then what I would suggest is just avoiding the mini turbo before the route and just grabbing the coin on the right hand side before tricking off the route, and then just tricking off the flower by shaking your controller to buffer the trick input. Now after landing, take a super tight turn before the bridge, and then do a right hop, right drift. The first right hop is primarily for alignment to make it easier to grab the 2 coins on the right hand side of the bridge, and the left hop before the right drift is to help you build up your next mini turbo more quickly. And we want to build up that mini turbo as quickly as possible because we want to start our next left drift as soon as we can to help us set up for the mushroom shortcut. The basic setup for this shortcut is that after starting the left drift, you want to more or less angle yourself in such a way that you're directly facing this gigantic gray pillar. When you go into the off-road, it'll act like a little ramp and give you airtime that should take you just to the right of that pillar. When you land, use your mushroom and start holding a hard left on the joystick so that you can kind of grind down the side of the glider ramp to get back down to the track. You're going to build up a super mini turbo well before the mushroom runs out, but the super mini turbo boost and the mushroom boost don't really stack, so you're going to want to release your super mini turbo as late as you can. Definitely after coming out of the off-road, but not too late, otherwise it'll screw up our alignment for the angled ramps. On lap 1, these ramps are pretty straightforward. Trick off the middle of the first ramp so that you can be in a good line to grab the 2 coins on the next 2 ramps, and then just trick off those ramps while grabbing the coins, making sure that when you grab the coin on the last ramp that you angle yourself to the right just a bit so that you can take the turn inside the temple really tightly. On laps 2 and 3, things get weird. Before going off the first ramp, we're going to do another left counter hop into right drift off the first ramp, and then just before landing on the second ramp, start holding a hard left on the joystick so that you don't fall off the track. Now here's the weird bit. Basically, after going off of the second ramp, you'll have a mini turbo built up. So what you want to do is before you land, release that mini turbo and then quickly tap the drift button again while holding left on the joystick. This will actually allow you to straighten yourself out while still in midair before getting to the third ramp so that you can put yourself in a good angle going into the temple. And don't ask me why this works because I haven't the slightest clue. But hey, them's the breaks. I should point out that it's possible to do all that stuff on lap 1 as well, but it makes grabbing the coins much harder, which is why I don't opt to go for it. Obviously, if all this stuff is giving you issues, just repeat the lap 1 strat of tricking off the ramps on all 3 laps. In either case, after going into the temple, drift as tightly around the next turn as you can, and then immediately start a left drift after you build up a mini turbo. The goal for this hairpin turn is to build up an ultra mini turbo before the ramp. On lap 1, the setup is start your left drift and then basically just hold right on the joystick so that you can take a wide line to grab the 2 coins. Then after grabbing the first coin, you must soft drift around the rest of the turn. Now it's hard to see that I got it here because I actually screwed up the setup a bit. You can tell I messed it up because I had to hold the drift almost until I was all the way at the ramp in order to get the Ultra Mini Turbo. I do this much more cleanly on lap 2, though the setup is slightly different. On lap 2, you basically want to try and just soft drift around the entire turn, only widening your drift angle for a fraction of a second if you're about to fall off. By the way, if you're not sure what soft drifting is, I've got an entire video dedicated to the topic of drifting, so I definitely recommend checking that out. Anyways, like I said, definitely one of the harder parts of the run, at least with the strats that I'm doing. So if your soft drifting is not that great, then just build up a Super Mini Turbo and release as soon as you get to the straightaway. Now after building up that Ultra Mini Turbo, or Super Mini Turbo if that's what you're doing, and then tricking off the ramp, the last step is to do a right hop into a hard left drift off the ramp, easing up on the drift angle just before you get to it. This should allow you to build up a Mini Turbo, and then if you start holding up and right, you'll move diagonally back to the track and do glider vectoring, which is faster than just tricking straight off the ramp. Now the last thing to mention about my PB strats is that you might have noticed we only grabbed 7 coins on lap 1. Coin 8 should be the middle coin just before the tree root, but honestly it can be pretty hard to get that consistently, especially if you're going for the super bounce strats. But after passing that coin, if you're on a slower pace than me, you'll want to make sure to make your way to the middle of the track after the super bounce so that you don't get wrecked by the totem pole thing on lap 2. Finally, coins 9 and 10 will come from the left hand side of the bridge section. You won't need to worry about the right hop, right drift stuff after lap 1 by the way, and that's because we'll be on the left hand side of the bridge, which allows us to start the drift a lot earlier. Now those are all the strats for my current personal best, so let's check out how to put them all together while I talk a bit more about the track. DK Jungle is a really hard track to play properly. In fact, it's probably my weakest time in the entire game, in the sense that for most tracks, I'm able to get within 4 or 5 seconds of the world record, but for DK Jungle, I'm almost 6 full seconds behind. And even getting that close took many hours of attempts. There are a few reasons for this. First of all, the terrain itself is just really bumpy and difficult to play on. I mean, we start the run with a gigantic tree root in our way and then immediately have to perform a super bounce, which in and of itself is not the most consistent thing in the world to do. And then right after that, we've got to deal with the totem poles. And while they're generally not the most difficult things to avoid, a bad super bounce can have you run face first into them on lap 1, as can a slightly slower pace on lap 2. The mushroom cut isn't really that bad, at least the way that I'm doing it, but the orange boost ramps just suck if you're doing anything more complicated than just tricking off of them. The strat that I use is in fact faster than tricking off all 3 ramps, but the setup that I use is super jank, and older world record strats did a whole series of alignment hops and mini turboless drifts just to make it as fast as possible, and frankly, I just didn't have the patience to try and figure that out. But wait, there's more! If you somehow manage to get all the super bounces, and avoid running into the totem poles, and falling off the track, we've still got that godforsaken Ultra Mini Turbo in the temple. That strat was so annoying to figure out that I basically just avoided it for 90% of my attempts, only making a serious attempt to figure it out so that I could break the sub 207 mark, which ended up not happening anyways due to bad execution of the angled ramp section. So yeah, there is basically no point in the entire run where you're able to take a breather, and every section has the potential to end a run completely. And that's again, even taking into account that I'm not doing world record strats in this run. I say strats as if there's more than one, but for just a bit of foreshadowing, there's really only one major difference between my run and the current world record, and we'll talk about it in detail in just a minute here. But the long story short version is that they do a completely different mushroom strategy than I do. Over the course of my time playing this game, I've watched them do it no joke at least 100 times, and while I have been able to execute it in my own runs, it's the most inconsistent thing that I've ever attempted to figure out, with successful attempts seemingly identical in execution to unsuccessful attempts. But now that we're coming up at the end of this run, let's talk about those strategies in more detail, shall we? Jumping straight into the world record mushroom strat, the world record does this thing where they hop at this little indentation in the grass to get into the off-road, and then do a single left hop, using the mushroom just before they land so that when they hit the edge of the off-road, it acts like a ramp that carries them clean over the track and onto the glider ramp. To finish up the strat, they build up a Super Mini Turbo and then use Motion Glider before doing the weird mid-air drift stuff in the orange boost ramp section. On laps 2 and 3, they just hop straight up onto the glider ramp and trick off of it instead of doing all that motion glider stuff. It should be obvious just from watching this, but there are so many ways that this can go wrong. From the mushroom inexplicably failing to carry you over the track, to actually making it over the track, only to seemingly have the hand of Satan throw you clean into the wall on the right hand side. I won't spend too much more time whining about this, but suffice to say that this strategy is much harder than it looks. And like so many things else in this game, I don't even think it looks particularly easy in the first place. There's only two other minor changes between my run and the world record run. The first is that instead of doing glider vectoring like I do at the end of the track, the world record goes even farther off the left-hand side of the ramp and then does motion glider strats on all 3 laps. The other change, while not major, does bear a bit of discussion. During that whole sequence from the start of the run to the super bounce, there's that tree root on the left-hand side of the track where I mentioned that you want to be far enough to the left to hop clean over the root before starting your right drift. The world record actually takes a line that purposely hits the root, then releases the drift in mid-air and lands in yet another drift to do the super bounce. The reason that they do this is that it ends up allowing them to trick a little bit closer to the edge of the flower, which bounces them higher than if they were to trick off the center. Now normally, as I've said before on this channel, airtime equals bad, but because you're moving so much faster during the super bounce, this is one of those rare occasions where you actually want more airtime. And that's everything you need to know about DK Jungle on 150cc. We're going to close out the video with some final thoughts while letting the current world record play out in the background. If you couldn't have gathered from my overly long rants during the time trial demonstration, this really isn't my favorite course. To be clear, that's not because it's a hard course, though it definitely is. It's more that the bumpiness of the terrain, including things like that giant tree root, just make it feel, I guess, unsatisfying to drive on. Not only that, but because it has so many sections where you need to master mechanics that aren't found on any other course, it's one of the least useful courses to time trial in terms of helping your overall skill at the game. Point is, you'd better all appreciate the fact that I forced myself to learn how to play this track just so you wouldn't have to spend hours and hours on end figuring it out like I did. Just kidding, I love you guys. But seriously, this was a particularly painful course to run, so if you found the video helpful, I really would appreciate if you could drop a like just to help the video get exposure to other people looking to improve at the game. And definitely leave a comment letting me know if these strats help you save time. Thank you all very much for taking the time out of your day to do some basic training, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.